Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Learn How to See Better podcast. This is your host, Drew Davis, and today I want to talk about something a little bit different, and it has to do with how we learn to see better with regards to learning, but not our own learning. This time it's the learning of our loved ones. Particularly, I'm talking about learning for our children. And the reason I'm interested in talking about this topic is, well, I've got children, and my oldest born son will be going into the first grade this fall, right? And so as I look at all of the different options available, it becomes very interesting because you say, okay, typically it's your kids in kindergarten and it's time for them to go into first grade, the elementary school, and off they go, right? And their journey really kind of begins down the school year's path. And the interesting thing about it is one thing that we are doing is we're actually evaluating options, my wife and I. We're evaluating options because you know what? There are a lot of options available for children's education these days. When you think about those options that are available, what we've started to recognize is something I was thinking about when we took the first tour of a few tours. And these few tours that we have lined up are of some options that are available in our neighborhood. So one is the local elementary school that I actually went to as a kid when my family first moved to Arizona. And now that I live in the same area, this is hands down the most convenient option. And literally walking distance could take walk my kid to school. At some point they get to old enough they can ride their own bikes, that sort of thing, or go with friends. So that is one option. And from the surface, we haven't toured the school yet. It's a pretty good option. It's an A-rated school, so no brainer. Hey, I feel like I turned out okay. I went to the same school. I live in the area. They've completely revamped the school, and it looks like they've thrown a lot of money at it, scraped the old building, new one, and from what I know, neighborhood and social proof feedback is good. So pretty much a no-brainer, right? Well, maybe not for sure, for certain, because as we look at these options that are available for my son, there's a couple other schools as well. One is I guess you'd categorize it as a charter school. It's called Basis. Some people have heard of it. It's sometimes touted as the type of school you can send your kids to if they're pretty academically inclined. And, if your kid's got the tendency to be a brainiac or has the potential to be just very academically advanced, or you might want to put your kid on that track. My understanding with limited knowledge, haven't even taken a tour yet, is this could be an option worthy of consideration, right? So we've got that one on the list because my little guy is pretty dang sharp, and I could see that possibly being a fit once we get some more information firsthand. And then the third and fourth options, my wife honestly did most of the homework on this. So one of the options I'm not as clear about, but I think it's a bilingual. That's what it is. It's a bilingual school, so it's full immersion, English and Spanish. So it's a little bit of a spin on a regular traditional, schooling. And last but not least is a Montessori style of teaching. And I didn't know anything about Montessori until some years back when my kids got involved for the first time. We were looking for options where they would be able to learn a little bit of Spanish. We live in Arizona and have a little bit of a diverse climate here as far as the language, and want to be able to have good flexibility for our kids to operate in a variety of environments. And since my wife can speak Spanish fluently, and I've got a little bit of background in it as well, I can at least hold my own. That seemed like something we wanted to keep going with our kids. So Montessori training, while not being an expert, is founded after the teachings and philosophies of Maria Montessori. And without getting into all the details of that here, you can go and Google her. That style of teaching has been around for some time, and it really resonates with our personal values, with some of the peace and collaboration and teamwork and community. There's just a lot of good positivity that's instilled in children at a very young age. Teamwork, conflict resolution, it just seemed to be something that we could use a little bit more of in the world today. Besides some of the things I do remember on the playground back in the younger days, things get rough and tumbly sometimes with some of the kids, and we've liked the philosophy of just kind of getting along and making sure that we focus on solutions as we interact with people, because that's one of the things we have to do through our whole lives is communicate. And I'm getting off track a little bit, but the point is I wanted to give you a landscape of what I'm about to go through, which is take a tour of these different schools so I can see what's going to be the best option for us to decide for our little kiddo, right? Seems to make sense, yeah? So as I broke this down, I had kind of a unique experience today. We go and take this tour, and the first institution is a Montessori style school. So that was the first one we just happened to line up based on scheduling, and it was the one I'm most familiar with already. And the interesting thing is we took a tour of this school, and I got to thinking just about the fact that it's a different landscape when you go and take your kid out of any school, or even when you remember when you were going to school as a little kiddo, going from elementary school to junior high, and then junior high to high school. They're completely different landscapes of education, right? You can remember it's like when you first got to the point you were old enough to backpack at the school with your friends, then you had lockers because you had a little more independence. And I'm at that point where I'm getting to see my little guy get to head off and enter that first realm of independence, going into first grade. And the amazing thing, that's the big one that we've probably started to think about, is there are options in general with these different schools, and having even the option to continue with Montessori style of teaching is pretty amazing. Again, because we didn't know this was around when we were young ones, and so we've found it to be a blessing, and we think it's a big component of why our children are as well-mannered as they are today. Again, our opinion, and they can be pretty wild and running around like hell on wheels from time to time, but the point being, really, they are very well behaved, and we like that Montessori style of teaching. But we both came from public schools, and I don't know if it was anything like it was for you when it was when you were growing up, like it was for me. But I went to a public school, and I remember I didn't know the difference between a public school and a private school, but the private school kids would get, kind of made fun of, and they didn't even go there, right? It was like, oh, the private school kids, those are the, uppity, snobbity kids that are, rich, and it was portrayed as a negative thing. And this is just what I remember, what kids would say about private school kids, and you just kind of you hear what a group says, and that's all of a sudden what you believe. Unfortunate but true. But looking at Montessori style school, traditional public schools, private school options, and even homeschooling as being an option these days, it's becoming more and more popular. And I'm even hearing instances where people are doing no schooling, where they're essentially traveling the world and just taking the experiences of life and immersions in different language and culture that actually sound pretty exciting from an artistic, completely open-minded concept. But it is also interesting how we want to subconsciously revert back to what we know most and what we're most comfortable and what we come from, which is a little concerning when you think about the fact that, one, the traditional school system hadn't really changed too much in 100 years, and just, unfortunately kind of funnels everyone into being just a classic occupation, and generally is not as focused on exposing young minds to the opportunities of being entrepreneurs, business owners, kidpreneurs even. And so that's something that my wife and I, as we've begun our entrepreneurial journey over this last decade plus, we find that there are certain things that entrepreneurs need to know and are taught that are literally like completely opposite from what classic employees that, work a 40-hour job and for 40 years and go down the employed traditional employment path. And that's where part of the rub, I think, starts. If we went through that journey and found it not to be the one for us, and we found a better way for us, does that mean it's necessarily a better way for our kids? Should we take them down that path with us and teach them the way that we know? Or do we go down the path that we just went down, even though it led us to a place where we felt that that's not the way you want to go? So there's a little bit of conflict there, admittedly, but just sharing that there's almost that I don't know if I'd even call it hypocritical, but there's that little bit of conflict of interest there. If you're trying to if you're trying to expose your kids to entrepreneurship and being able to build a business and have some of that freedom and potentially even be a kidpreneur, because, our kids are starting to ask us some of those questions. Hey, what are some of the things that we can do, to make money? And, they see education. They see us watching some of the training videos that are out on YouTube, and they see young kids out there teaching things to other kids, and they see what's possible, and they're interested in participating. So it's one of those things I certainly don't want to discourage them, but you realize it's like, wow, if my kid wants to go down an entrepreneur path, that I would certainly want to do my best to instill everything that I know and have been taught and have learned, that I'd infuse that into him. But there are what I would see as not just roadblocks, but potentially conflicts in interest, the way that the teachings work. And that's where you get into this, what role do you want the primary education form to have in your kid's life? Meaning, if I could state it a little bit differently, there's going to be some sort of primary education source in your kid's life, and the best form of education is going to be the supplemental education that we as the parents can provide. So how do we best bolt on to that? Because if we're bolting on as this entrepreneurial add-on to a traditional employee mindset, training system, it seems like that's going to cause a little bit of agitation internally, versus looking at something that might be more malleable or flexible with regards to its structure. And so essentially it's really something where I'm trying to architect the best solution for our kids, but also have the ability to make sure they're well-rounded and prepared for anything, right? What if my kids don't elect to go down a similar path that my wife and I have gone and want to, continue the family business or be entrepreneurs? What if they do feel they're more, what if they do value security more than freedom, in the sense that they would rather be tied to an existing structure that takes care of, that they work for? I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And if anything, we would want to be the ones encouraging them, if they're going to go that path, to do something they love and get paid for it. That way it doesn't feel like work. So as I step back and look at all of this again, it's really about seeking the best solution. What is the best solution? Paid versus free. I mean, I would have to imagine, even in my limited knowledge, that there's probably public schools out there that have better education than some private schools. But at the same time, there's probably private schools that don't necessarily cost an arm and a leg, or maybe they do, but they run laps around anything around it within a stone's throw and then some, that you'd be ludicrous not to take advantage of the opportunity to get with that particular educational institution at practically any cost. And that's when I saw what was the big purple elephant in the room, and that's the fact that we tend to look at education for our children similarly to the way we look at education for ourselves. And so I think there's a link. Most people probably don't even think about seeking the best solution like I was talking about. And is that best solution part of a traditional, public, private, homeschool, Montessori, no school, world school, etc.? But I think people just default back to how they were raised. Were you a public school kid? Then yeah, you're probably going to think public school. Were you a private school kid? Yeah, you're probably going to be encouraged or thinking in the minds of, hey, I know I got a quality education that my parents invested in me, and that's what I want for my children. And that, I think, has a direct effect on our own views, especially with regards to whether we as parents even view education for our children, that is, as an expense or an investment. what would you think, right? I mean, even if you went to college, but if you went to a public school, but then you paid for college, you may very well still think from the mindset of, well, my kid's going to public school because that's the public schooling that I went to as a youth. But it really just doesn't have to be that way. And we don't have to do things the way they've always been done because of the way they've always been. And so as we look at that expense or that investment in our children, it's like, okay, that might be okay for you if you think that additional education or the cost of the education for the kids is okay for you. But, really is it okay for them? What if you have the means by which you could provide better education for your little ones, but it came at a cost? But you elect to, just because of your philosophies and viewpoints on advanced or supplemental trainings, just because you didn't do them, that there's no need for you to necessarily do them for your kids. That makes sense? So I mean, yeah, I guess it probably varies by individual, but for me, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, as we all know, the rising costs of tuitions throughout the country is just, on a consistent climb. I think last time I saw stats was like 6% year over year for the last, 20 years, something ridiculous. But that's not even the point. I think the point is, we'll talk about the cost of college and what we need to spend on it, which is still viewed as an expense, and there's a cost associated with it. But then there's also measuring that value we get. So we think that almost it's if we can't get the value out of spending the money on the education until the kids are grown up. And it's almost seeming backwards to me, because I would venture to say that no different than trying to teach a child or teach a person a new language. They're probably better equipped to learn that new language as a child. And I would imagine that even if you're looking at some sort of paid option, maybe it's after school tutor for your kids, that investment, that expense that's actually an investment in your kid, could quite possibly go farther and be a better, more effective, more highly leveraged investment, because of the simple fact that they're younger, the mind's more malleable, more receptive to the new knowledge and teachings that are going to set them on the best path for success. So as I really look at that, I thought, wow, for so many years, for so long, I know that I always thought, well, that's a no-brainer. My kid's going to, go to the school that's, the closest public school, and it's based on convenience. And you think, wow, is that kind of it? What if there's, a better school that might be, 3 miles away, 5 miles away, that's twice as good as your local school at no additional cost to you? Would you still choose the most convenient one that's next door, or would you go the extra mile, right? So there's so many different variables, and it's not like I'm saying, I'm going to the ends of the earth, I'm spending nothing but $1 million a year for my kid to go to first grade because that is 100% the best. I mean, hey, if you got the means to do so, then that's a separate discussion, right? But in most scenarios, if you have the ability or the wherewithal to be able to at least choose whether or not you're going to do some sort of paid education for your kid, or go with something that's not paid but also valuable, it does get to be a little bit of a deeper discussion in what type of philosophy that, are you going to have? And is that a per kid thing, or are you doing it one by one? If you've got one, you like to go the private school route, but maybe one is, very musically gifted and might actually need to be attending some sort of music school. Do you channel into that? Or do you say, nope, you're going to the same private school that the older brother goes to because that's how it works? But the same way we have to parent our children differently because they're all so different and unique, I would imagine that there could be some of the same elements of consideration with regards to their education. What does the child actually need to optimize their development? And so I admit that I'm in just this own phase of learning where I'm actually going through the process of learning how to see better. This is a part of my journey that I look to make some of these best decisions for my kids. And even though I've done a great job of taking a long time to get all this done, but the fact of the matter is we've got a few different scenarios and situations that we want to look at, because I think these things that I'm sharing are valid for any parent to really look at. I mean, we're fortunate enough to have options that we can do any of them that we elect to, because I think that, even though there are probably some, ridiculous opportunities available to take place that may or may not make sense. It's just having choices and being able to select, what is going to be best for my kid, what feels right. So we're going to go through the process of touring, these 2, 3, 4 different facilities to go ahead and get that feel and ask the questions and best understand what are the value adds of each environment, because it's not like I'm looking for daycare. We're at that stage where our children are beginning to move into the more traditional window of education, where their foundational learning begins, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, So it's very important to us that we make the decision that we feel is best, because I think we've all seen it. We all know the deal, right? When it comes to school, it's unfortunate that children have such a bad attitude about it, typically. But let's really look at that. Why is that attitude bad? Well, a lot of instances, it's been proven that the kid's bored in school, that they lash out and look for attention because they're bored out of the mind. The kid's too sharp. They need to be in a, higher education or advanced learning or some tutoring so they can apply that excess energy that they're getting that's being nervously spent on silly activities to be the funny guy. But similarly, when there's no legitimate interest in what's being taught and the processes by which information is either conveyed, shared, or even some instances crammed down kids' throat, what is the interactive teamwork that people are taught? Because the real world requires a lot of teamwork versus the one kid against the rest of them, and just everyone's competing for the highest score. It does get to a point where you see things better and you see things from a different perspective now that we're in the role of parents and not just going through school, but we also are young enough that we remember going through school. And I can see my prior experiences differently and how systems were run. And now that you see them as adults, it's like, okay, I'm tracking to see how everything comes together. And now we're to the point where we're ready to make some of these decisions, but they're monumental decisions. And we believe in life by design, we really do. And as we orchestrate the life vision that we've organized for ourselves, this becomes that next step. And we essentially begin to visualize what type of experience we want to have. And then next step is we go through and we set forth and take steps that are going to allow us to actualize little samples of that reality in advance, right? It's like you've got to inspect what you expect. If we expect a positive experience where we are receiving a high level of value from our child's education, whether it's paid or at no cost to us, it's something that we also want to be very clear and go into it eyes wide open about what that experience and what that value is going to be like and how it differentiates from other options that are available, recognizing fully that there would be both pros as well as cons to any decision that's made. So it does get to be a very distinct, thoughtful time in our life. But even stepping back from the specifics, so any listener can get value out of this, is understanding the theme of this being the price of education and how we view it. There is a price. And I say a price, or I could use the word cost, a cost of education. And it's not just the expenditure that you make. It's no different than it's no different than the philosophy of investing in education to begin with. What's the cost of that book? What's the cost of that class? Okay. Well, what's the cost of you not taking that class? What's the cost of you not seeking higher education? What's the cost of you not getting a certification or developing a hands-on trade or skill or ability that can put food on the table for your family? What's the cost of not doing certain things? And that's where I say, the price, to be a more operative word here, because the price could be paid, the price could be free, but it's the cost of the education choice that really becomes critical here. Because if opportunity cost plays at this, and you elect to, kind of skate on by with the inexpensive decision, it's a little bit unfortunate, because when you think about how that generally comes together, especially if the decision to elect a free option for the kiddo is simply for the luxury of cutting costs, right? Case in point, if you were to say, hey, I'm going to put my kid in a public school just because public school's free, but you've actually got the income that you can afford it, but you don't value the education and you don't think it's worth it, or you think it's silly to pay for school because, they're just going to school. School should be free. I think the unfortunate part and the downside to that train of thinking is it's like, compare that investment. Let's say it's, I don't know, let's just pick a number for the sake of argument and say $500 a month to send your kid to some sort of paid offering to get a higher education. And higher education, I'm just saying, additional education, supplemental education. It's not college, right? So case in point, this example, $500 a month for your kid to get some supplemental training to go with some schooling, right? Now, if you say, I'm going to skip that expense because I don't want to pay for the school, the unfortunate thought is, okay, where's that $500 a month go now? What is it going towards? Is it going towards some other investment? Is it just going out of the door, right? And, going into, beer money or something like that, or just being wasted otherwise? Or even worse, is it spent in a way that is detrimental to you, It's just one of those things where I think we have to give some extra thought to that as parents. And I would challenge parents to give consideration to how we view the price of education. And I would recommend that we count the cost of the choice and weigh the cost of the decision to go one way or another, right? I mean, in some people's instance, the decision to put their kid to paid school, we don't want wouldn't want to see anybody missing their mortgage payment and struggling over it. But at the same time, wouldn't want to see the potential next, Nobel Peace Prize winning, superstar, creator, inventor never get discovered because they didn't have that small investment by their loved ones in their future, in a brighter future, because it costs, a couple of nickels and pennies, and it might make you miss a few, Starbucks through the course of the month. So just recognize, we don't want the way that we raise our kids with regards to education to necessarily be based on the way we were raised. Don't let our upbringing unnecessarily shape the views that we have for the outlook and the vision that we have and to see big for our kids, So yeah, is it an expense or is it an investment? And it might be okay for you, but is it okay for the kid? And to just try to be open-minded to seek what the best solution is. Do your homework, do your due diligence. That's what we're going through now, that part of it all, to see what is going to make the most sense for us, because it may be something that we hadn't planned, right? It may be something that we get exposed to as we learn how to see better, as we take these new steps forward to get exposure to opportunities for education that can do better to help our child reach their best potential. We just might have a kidpreneur brewing, a child in the making that's wanting to do something to be of a greater value add to this world and to provide positive impact on the community. And so I thought it would be good to share that and give a little bit more of an extended share of something that really had my mind going and my brain buzzing today as I went through this short, simple task of touring a school that I may be putting my kid into in the fall. And it just really made me run through the series of thoughts back to when I was a little one, and what was my experience with school, and when I first started going to school, and when we moved out west and going to a new school, and differences with the way teaching and students behaved and the cultural interactions and just all of that. And now I get the opportunity to best lay the groundwork for what my child's educational future is going to look like over these next 10 years when we're talking about the pre-college education experience. So that's something I'm hoping someone can get some value out of. If you are anything like me or have little ones that are just about to head into the school years, you may find this valuable just as far as perspective, something to noodle on. I'm not pushing one agenda one way or the other or one particular solution. I'm just sharing where I'm at in my journey, and that I'm at the point where I get to look at these options and start to evaluate these solutions. And it's pretty cool, because I think the most important thing for me and where I'm at in my life right now, and the philosophy I live by, is to find the best solution. And I mean, gosh, I've been paying for daycare all this time anyway. Most parents probably get to the thinking of like, oh, I get to put my kid in public schools. I don't have a daycare bill anymore. And hallelujah, that bill is off my plate. And it's like, okay, well, all right, well, how are we going to redirect those dollars once they free up? You're going to start taking classes for yourselves, or is this party hardy at the bar money now? And so to just kind of look at, where you're at and what's going on in your life and what makes the most sense, because of the fact that, hey, if we've been paying for daycare, how much more effective could those same dollars be spent, or have those same dollars go to the idea of actually accelerating the learning of your child at a young age? And if you want to go and learn more about accelerating learning, I talked about that in a previous podcast episode, but that it can be so powerful. We're not just talking daycare anymore. This is the time where the kids are really starting to learn and develop their cognitive abilities with speech, communication, deeper interest in subject matter. And it's a very fascinating time. And the idea that so many of us may be robbing our children of the opportunity to blossom into their most beautiful form if they only were given the right track to run on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, a paid education option, but to not limit or rule out paid education options for your particular situation, even whether it's a combination of things, hiring in a tutor, sending them to specialized summer camps, whether it's for sports, for music, for art, literature, you name it. It's just an amazing landscape out there. And so many of us probably fail to even recognize what those opportunities are, the fact that they exist, and that their children's best potential, best opportunities to reach their full potential may very well be coming from this decision that's made right now. Their chance to get the ability to spread their wings wider because they're placed in an environment that is most suited for them. So if you know your kids and you're trying to make these decisions, go look at a couple of different schools, find out what's going to be the best solution, see what some of the things are, figure out the things that that are unique about your kid that, may be a concern for you or maybe an area of opportunity for you, and ask those questions, write them down, prepare them, use it as a quiz, right? Because the same way you're interviewing those schools, they're interviewing you to see if you're a right fit. But it's a two-way street, and it's something we should take control over, not just by default throw our kids in the school that's just closest to our house, unless you're specifically buying the house next to the school you want. It's not just something that should be driven off of convenience alone. It ought to be a concentrated effort. I think that's life by design. I think that's one of the best ways to really set the stage for giving our kids a good track to run on. And I can feel that I'm pretty charged up about it because it just seems so powerful. And I can't wait to go through the rest of this process and see what I can learn, and then do the evaluation to figure out what we feel is going to be the best bet. And knowing that there's always the ability to make changes if we should ever need to. But we're going in it with the positive outlook. And in my book, positive outlook means positive outcome. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode here, but hoping again that you find some goodness out of that there that you can share with another individual that might be at this phase in their life, trying to figure out what to do. And the idea is you just got to learn how to see better. In this case, it's regards to the education of not you, but your little ones. And the price of the education that you provide is a major decision that you'll get the opportunity to make. So until next time, be sure to tune in, share, and like this if you are on board with the content. Thanks again, and take care.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.